Thank you so much for joining me on the way forward. I'm Eddie Francis. This brother joined me last year, and I am happy to bring him out, bring him back to the show. Dr. Eugene Lee-Johnson. He's an assistant professor of political science at Southern University. My brother, how are you?
I'm doing well, brother Francis. How you doing today? Thanks for having me.
Man, I'm doing really, really good. So we just had a really interesting election in Texas. It was the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate. We had James Tallarico and we had Jamie Crockett involved in that, and it was a very interesting election. It seems like there were a lot of dynamics that contributed to Tallarico winning, but one of the dynamics that has been discussed is electability.
hmm
That is something that seems to get voters, especially Black voters, irate. And I wanted to just get a hold of this issue of electability, what it is, why it happens, what makes it so important, and what voters need to look out for. So let's just start with a simple definition. How would you define electability in a political election?
Electability, simply put, is the voter's perception that a candidate has the ability to win. Now that is a very simple definition. However, I think when you listen to traditional media talk about electability, a lot of times electability is presented in the wrong way, and so it leads listeners to have the wrong ideas about what electability is. We often put electability specifically on the candidate instead of it being something that is on the voters, right? And so
Mm.
this was actually an interesting conversation. So when you reached out to me, I was like, okay, this is cool. Because while my research agenda has changed a little over the last couple years, my dissertation was actually on Black women political leadership in traditional and non-traditional politics. And so I looked at electability a lot, and I also looked at the ways that Black women just experience political power and the search for it. But one of the things that happens here is we will say, well, I don't know if Kamala Harris can win this election against Donald Trump, because she's black and she's woman, we need a strong, male presence to win this election. And probably, because of the backlash against Barack Obama, we probably need a strong white male presence. And we're thinking about, like, okay, she's black, she's woman, she's South Asian, Indian, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we're thinking about those as her characteristics, while not thinking about this is actually what we're thinking about. We're saying her race and her gender is the reason that we don't think she could win. But we're also gauging this in an unknowing fashion with our neighbors' opinions. We're
Mm.
basically saying, do I believe other people believe that Jasmine Crockett can win this race? And when you think about a state like Texas, which I my birthday is in 2 days, I'll be 35, right? But the funny thing is, since I was a kid, I've been hearing talks about Texas turning purple. And one of these things about this conversation is when people talk about Texas turning purple, as soon as Jasmine Crockett announced that she wanted to run for that seat, everyone immediately said she has no chance of winning. And so that shows you when people went to that, she has no chance of winning, they were immediately thinking, the people around me aren't going to vote for her because of what I deem to be things that are working against her, her race, her gender. And in some aspects, people are saying that she's putting on a facade of her personality.
Yeah.
They've tried to use that she's acting like a around the way girl. Some people have used the terms ghetto, et cetera,
Mm.
et cetera, et cetera. And so they've used these terms that have been used to stereotype black women as well. And so you're seeing kind of the gamut of black women political talk all happening at one time.
Yeah. And excuse me, I said Jamie Crockett, Jasmine Crockett, but that's I appreciate that definition because I think that people get very, very confused, as you pointed out so aptly, when it comes to this issue of electability. It really makes me think of, and I don't know how true this is because I haven't seen it for myself, But there's this story of when Kwame Kilpatrick was elected governor, elected mayor of Detroit. And there's a story that he was wearing an earring when
Yeah.
he was interviewed right after the election. And the reporter apparently asked him, "You said that you weren't going to wear your earring. Why are you wearing the earring?" And he said, "Oh, well, they said I wouldn't get elected with the earring. So I took it out during the campaign. But since I got elected, I'm wearing it again." And so it's really interesting how perception, how powerful perception is when it comes to this issue of electability. So, with all of that being said, you covered some of why it matters. What are your additional thoughts about what voters should understand about what actual electability is and why it should matter?
So first, I just want to say that there's some irony that you bring up Kwame Kilpatrick
Yeah, I
today
know.
in lieu of other things, but um,
It
when
was
we,
it was probably the best story I can think of right off the top of my head.
but it is a good story for another reason because after he was elected, you would hear people say stuff like he's the hip hop mayor.
Yep.
And when you hear the terms hip hop before certain times, because of where hip hop is born from, that term was often just meant to be he's for black people, right? He's urban. And and so that was also a thing where people weren't sure that he could be elected in presenting himself in the way that he actually showcases, and he would have to clean himself up, right? And so when we're thinking about this, we're thinking about two things really. We're thinking about preference and we're thinking about strategy. And so number one, we're trying to figure out um does the candidate is this the candidate I personally like the most, right? And then second, we're trying to figure out is this the candidate that I believe can win the election? And so I feel like, electability has always been a big talk, but it's definitely become a larger conversation now because we've since when Barack Obama burst onto the scene, we've now had a black president and more minorities at the top levels of the executive politics, right? Not saying that they're winning, but saying that they're campaigning and reaching those levels with the opportunity of potentially being a candidate for the Republican or Democratic Party for president. And so with that, we come into this idea of thinking, okay, I like this person because maybe the person meets some of my representation requirements. And when we think about representation, a lot of times we're thinking about three things. We're thinking about substantive representation. And so with substantive representation, you're thinking about me and this person share the same ideologies, right? It doesn't matter who they are, but they articulate how I feel about politics and issues. We're thinking about descriptive representation. This person meets my descriptive requirements. For a lot of times, this is black people wanting to vote for black people, right? This is LGBTQIA plus people wanting to vote for LGBTQIA plus people, women wanting to vote for women, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so often in the black community, we believe that our descriptive representative and our substantive representative will be the same person. And that's not always the case, right? But that's what we're thinking because we're thinking about shared backgrounds, linked fate, common upbringings, culture, etc. And then lastly, there's symbolic representation. And symbolic representation is where an outside party makes you a symbol for your group, right? You may have heard in growing up that, oh my gosh, you're so articulate. You
Yeah.
don't talk like the rest of them. And so, in that example, that small example that a lot of us have experienced, you are becoming a symbol for your race. You are the difference here, right? And so, when we're thinking about representation in that way, I like this candidate. This candidate represents me for some reason. However, after that, does this candidate that I like actually have the opportunity to win the election? And when that becomes part of the conversation, it becomes a larger discussion because now we're talking about who has the most money, who has the most experience, which candidate is more charismatic, right? We're thinking about, as it pertains to women, unfortunately, we're thinking about, do they meet the traditional standards of beauty?
Hmm. Yep.
Right? we're thinking about how does this person present themselves on the issues, right? So a lot of times there's a lot of different reasons why we say, can this person win or lose an election? But it often comes down to our own perceptions of ourselves, but also our understanding of the world around us. A lot of us felt like in 2020 that Joe Biden was the only person that could beat Donald Trump and prevent a second Donald Trump presidency, which ended up happening anyway. But the reason why a lot of people felt that you needed Joe Biden or someone like him in 2020 was because they felt that Donald Trump was a backlash from the 8 years of Barack Obama. And so you needed to turn away from identity politics and go back to a traditional model. And in this country, the traditional model is a cisgender heterosexual white male. And so often when we're presenting in this way, we are unknowingly continuing the lines of stereotyping and discriminations of groups and preventing them from having power. And so electability is about preference, but it's also about strategy. Number one, do I like this candidate? But number two, do I actually believe this candidate has the opportunity to win? And for us, we're often removing candidates from having a chance before they even show us that they can win, because we believe, well, they're black and they're running against this very entrenched white candidate. There's no way they're going to win in Texas. Or we'll say Texas is racist or Texas doesn't vote Democrat. There's no way they're going to win in Texas. And so we put all of these descriptives on before we make the decision. And that was happening to Jasmine Crockett. So you can have the news media saying, oh my gosh, she put on a facade. It was all an act. Or you can say people, well, it was a dumb strategy for her to run for that race anyway. But the fact of the matter is, as soon as she announced, people were already writing her off before she ever made a campaign move.
Yeah.
And so we can't say, which, because I saw a lot of people coming out saying, well, he just ran a better campaign than her. Well, the same people were saying that she should have never ran for the seat in the first place. So if you made the decision that she should have never ran for the seat in the first place, you can't come back and say, well, he just ran a better campaign, because your mind was already made up.
Yeah. Yeah. Hold on. Before I ask the next question, put your left collar down. It flipped up on you. There we go. There we go. All right. Here we go. So I want to get your thoughts about something really quickly. Our good brother Roland Martin, he did his own breakdown of that
Mhm.
election, and he was pretty critical of Crockett's strategy, and he also noted that Tallarico had a bigger war chest, and so just thinking about that alone, I want to ask you, in your academic opinion, taking a look at that election, do you think it came down to electability, or do you think it came down more to one candidate probably just having more of a better strategy than another candidate? What did you see?
It didn't just come down to electability, but ultimately, based on the campaigns that they ran, it came down to two competing definitions of electability. So, Jasmine Crockett, if we look at her campaign, she focused on energizing and expanding the Democratic coalition. Now, that is a very strong point, because this is what Democrats have been trying to do for the last 20 years now, right? If I get Obama in, then I get Hillary Clinton in, uh, if I pass DOMA, if I pass Stop Asian Hate, I'm going to expand the coalition by having all of these minorities under one group with my traditional tentpole Democrats, right? So that's a traditional strong campaign strategy. She also focused her turnout on black voters and other underrepresented groups. Now, some people might say that's where she went wrong, right? So, but in her way of trying to expand and energize the coalition in Texas, she believes I have to get these voters to turn out. And so, on one hand, she's right, But on the other hand, as it comes down to strategy, and I've ran a campaign before, you have to be able to perform this cost analysis before you actually start. What I do when I run a campaign, and I haven't ran one in years, but what I've done traditionally is I will look at basically a history of the district. I would look at the candidates who won and the candidates who lost of the party of the candidate that I'm representing. Um, and then what I'll say is, if the candidate I'm representing has already have an established base, you're strong here, so maybe we can spend 25% of your turnout funds here, and you those people know you're going to be there. You're going to show up, but you don't need to put 2,000 signs in that area, right? But if you know these people over here don't know you, you're going to have to put in some more work for them to know who you are, but also understand what you represent. And so now this part comes down to Jasmine Crockett operating as a black woman. Some of these people would never give her the opportunity to actually show who she is on politics conceptually. They will not allow her to actually speak about the actual policy she wants to put in place because they can't get past the identity politics part of it.
Right. Yep.
Right. And so this is the part about her being a black woman that's kind of an issue that's going to stay here regardless of how we get into campaign strategies. However, you do have to understand, like, where's the cost analysis of spending more money in a district that I don't have a base in already versus spending money in a district that I'm already strong in. But then lastly, she presented a more non-confrontational, like visible style that can mobilize a base. It was very uh it was very charismatic and cheerful in the way that it's like, hey y'all, we gonna get this done together. Right? And so she wasn't trying to make the argument about electability in the way that she's trying to get people's perceptions about her changed. She was actually trying to get the people to change the perceptions about themselves. Y'all believe that Texas will not vote for a Democrat. But I'm telling you, if you expand the base and you recognize the power that you have, we can win this election. And because at the end of the day, we're talking about a primary election, but these two candidates are ultimately presenting their arguments for the final election,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? They are setting their grounds of like, if y'all vote for me here, this is what's happening then,
So
right?
she was trying to get a paradigm shift.
Yes, she was trying to
Wow.
present a paradigm shift. But when you get to Talarico, he's emphasizing appealing to moderates,
Hmm.
independents, suburban voters, right? Which is kind of traditional in that aspect in Texas politics. He's presenting himself as someone who could persuade voters beyond the Democratic base.
Yeah.
But once again, that goes into his identity. As a
Yeah.
white man, I can persuade you more than Jasmine Crockett because you're more likely to present that I am a leader that people would respect.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we still have this issue of gender and race swaying back and forth in this election. But then lastly, he highlighted his messaging style and crossover appeal in a way where he reminds me in a small way of Pete Buttigieg. When Pete Buttigieg was running for president, he was able to talk about policy in an accessible way that anybody can understand. And I think that was the best thing that he did in his race. So when Talarico was running, he's presenting policy in a way that a middle schooler can understand. And for a lot of people, they're like, "Ooh, this is great. This
Oh,
reminds me of this."
and he was a teacher. He was a I think he was a middle school
Exactly.
teacher, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And so he kind of reminds people of Beto in a sense without the skateboard,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so we're looking at where on one hand, Jasmine Crockett is looking at a turnout based electability. And on the other hand, he's looking at a persuasion based electability. Jasmine
Mm.
Crockett is trying to expand the Democratic base, which if that is something that she could have completed, it not only helps her, but it helps Texas Democratic politics in the future, regardless of who runs. And
Mm.
Talarico is running a ways where he's saying, look, I'm the candidate who can win over moderates and independents. When he won the primary, he gave a speech, and I can't give this speech word for word, but he basically said, "We need to stop all of the fighting. We need to stop ending friendships. We need to stop losing family members because we have a difference in politics. We need to find where we align and turn this country over to the country that we used to love." Basically, he's basically saying we want to move to an era before Trumpism.
Hmm.
Now, for a lot of people, the era before Trumpism was still an issue.
Yeah.
However, for most people, the era before Trumpism, if it did nothing else, it allowed them to have a normal political day. They did not have to wake up and think something political was going to happen that could potentially impact their lives. In other words, they got to ignore it.
Mm, mm.
And so he's
So,
presenting that style, and it worked because ultimately, a lot of people don't want to be confronted with their issues.
mhm.
They just want somebody to say, okay, you know what? I do want my grandfather who is against me, even though I'm gay, to be able to show up to Christmas dinners and we can get along. They
Yeah,
want to be able
yeah.
to do that. While Jasmine Crockett is like, y'all, we got to get out of here. We got to get these people going. If y'all show up, we can get this done.
Mm,
And so it's
mm.
different. We're looking at turnout based electability versus persuasion based electability. But there's still this swaying measure of race and gender that plays into how these candidates can actually strategize electability.
So let me end with a question that puts it on the voters,
Okay.
which voters hate it when you put it on the voters. And I have a couple of questions in one. And one part of that question is, how can voters manage our reactions to the media narrative when it comes to electability? But then also, for anyone who wants to run for public office, how can they manage themselves when it comes to the issue of electability?
All right, so for voters, there's a few things. Um, and this goes back into just kind of learning about science and the scientific method in childhood. The first thing you have to do is you have to separate perception from evidence. Just because you perceive someone in some way doesn't mean that's how everyone else will perceive them, and it also doesn't mean that is actually what's real. If we go back to 2006, most people wouldn't have thought that Barack Obama would have became the Democratic nominee for president. And then he took the world by storm overnight basically, and everything changed. And the last 10 years is an outcome of him in 2006 basically. Second, you have to recognize that there is bias in electability. People sometimes have projection. Some people sometimes have assumptions about race, gender, ideology, geography, and they project those things onto candidates. So you have to be aware of your own biases, but that's not something that people do in their everyday lives in general. So to ask them to do it about electability will be kind of difficult because they don't do it in their everyday lives, right? So the media, when the media discusses like electability, they focus on speculation. I believe because of this, I speculate this will be the outcome. But voters never ask whether the claims are supported by polls, by past election results, by demographic trends. Going back to what I said, when I manage a campaign, I go back and look at the election results of the district that have a candidate campaigning for, right? And that's kind of touching on where I'm going to go in the second part. They also got to remember that elections are dynamic. Candidates they can start off less viable, and then something clicks, and now they are a great candidate. Um, Reverend Jesse Jackson just died. Rest in peace. If we go back to Reverend Jesse Jackson and his Rainbow Coalition. The first time he ran, people thought it was just like a joke. Oh, Jesse Jackson, he's a byproduct of the civil rights era. He's running, but But most people don't know that Jesse Jackson, when he ran for president, got the it was one of the highest years of black voter registration ever. Still. And then when he comes back the second time, he presents policy that he made the Democratic Party actually have to adopt and change the way that things worked. And so for him, it didn't happen in a campaign cycle, which it started to, but it wasn't enough because he was never going to be able to be the Democratic nominee for president at that time. Like, right? And so for him, it didn't happen in a campaign cycle truly, but he kind of started that conversation. And then 4 years later, even though he didn't become president, he basically created enough change to shift how politics work. And so you have to remember that these things are malleable. They can move, they can be shifted. And so you got to say, man, I got to go into every election with open eyes. There's a quote that we often learn in political science. There's no such thing as an educated voter. The information is always changing. You and I have been on this call for 26 minutes or so, right? We haven't had access to our phones. We don't know what has changed politically over just the last 26 minutes. That's not discussing everything that's just going continuously. So, if we know there's no such thing as an educated voter, how does a voter continue to understand the dynamics that an election can change and a candidate can grow and become something different during a campaign cycle? And then lastly, they have to consider their personal preferences alongside the candidate's strategy. Jasmine Crockett had people's personal perceptions working against her as soon as she announced. And that's everybody. And I don't mean personal perceptions as it pertains to racism, which there's just definitely some racism there, some sexism. But I even mean from black people internalizing those things just because they believe there's no way they're gonna let a black woman win this race. So I don't even know if I should show up and turn out
And Tallarico had perceptions working for him.
for him,
Yeah.
right? Just like Joe Biden had perceptions working for him, where it was basically in 2016. I remember having a call. One of my friends called me the night that before the election results are final. It's 12 a.m. the next morning when Trump is about to become president, and she's like, "Eugene, what are we gonna do?" And I was like, well, we got to survive. I was like, black people, a lot of us have survived. I was like, unfortunately, some things are going to happen because that's what happens when you have politics changing. And I was like, in 4 years, Joe Biden is going to become president. And I remember when Joe Biden becomes president, she was like, you said it. And I was like, I know because I understand people. They knew that they needed someone who was experienced enough, but also presented themselves to traditional white men enough. There
Yeah.
needed to be someone that white male Democrats, white male Republicans, and white male independent and no party voters could say, I could vote for this guy. Because if you look at the results between the primaries of Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders in 2020 versus Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders in 2016, basically they all shifted. In the races where Bernie Sanders did beat Hillary Clinton or did well, Joe Biden blew him out. And the only thing that changes really is the gender. Because Hillary Clinton may have been, when she ran for president, the most experienced person to ever run for that office.
Mhm.
And so when you think about these things, it shows you how much race and gender play into it. And a part of that process with Hillary, same thing with Jasmine here, even though the race part plays into it as well, is a lot of people are just like, I don't really know if a woman can lead,
Yeah.
especially in a place like Texas, right? Strong pro Second Amendment, strong pro anti-immigrant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Can that woman lead? Because there are a lot of Democrats in those states, just like Louisiana, who are very conservative.
Yep.
You know? And then your second question was about candidates, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
All right. And so for candidates, and I don't know if I got a time limit, but I'm gonna try to explain this in the quickest way I can while also being as most thorough because I don't want to take too much time. But this is something that I like to talk about. So first, candidates got to demonstrate viability early. Now, going back to the Jasmine Crockett race and thinking about black women, thinking about minorities in general, right? When I was doing research for my dissertation, one of the things that we saw is political elites were less likely to take the experiences that black women had in their community and count that as experience toward politics. So that means being teachers, being activists, being involved in their church, being nurses, etc. All of those positions are positions that have a very strong way of leading into politics. Healthcare, education, right? Etc. But political elites didn't actually accept that from black women because they don't believe that black women present in leadership the same ways, right? So, how does a minority candidate or any candidate show that they're viable? Number one, you got to be able to build strong fundraising numbers. But part of strong fundraising, and I'm really dedicating this towards new candidates, not really established candidates. Because established candidates, you got a machine working behind you basically after a certain amount of time after you're an incumbent. So I'm really kind of basing this towards new candidates. You have to know who are the king makers here. So if you are running for a state election or a local election in Louisiana, if you're running for an election in New Orleans, who are the people in the community that can not only get people to vote for me and know who I am, but can also provide me money, right? And in doing that, building strong fundraising numbers also mean I got to get strong endorsements. So is there, if I'm running for a position in New Orleans, can I go to the St. Aug Alumni Association because I'm a St. Aug graduate and I know they gonna throw their support behind me? Hey y'all, brother Eddie Francis, class of 1985. I don't know. I'm just throwing a year out. I'm not trying
No,
to say
88. Don't do that to me,
88.
man. 88.
88. Brother Eddie Francis, class of 88, is running for Senate district. Dot dot dot. We
Right.
want you all to throw your support behind him. Y'all know St. Aug got a strong base, right? There you go with endorsements, but also your brothers can give individual funds, but they can also come together as an alumni association and get funds. But you also got to show some strong early polling competitiveness, and that is the most difficult thing to do because I don't know if you ever seen the movie The Distinguished Gentleman with Eddie Murphy,
Yes.
and you know the entire point of him getting in that office was it was Jeff Johnson, the name you know.
Mhm.
A lot of times, once people run for office, they are running because they are popular in a certain segment of the population. Somebody knows them. So if people don't know you, how do I show early competitiveness? And one of my ways of doing that is I try to tell people if you know you have desires to run for office, you have to show those desires early. That means you got to start showing up to football games. You got to start showing up to community meetings. You got to start hosting the Eddie Francis Back to School drive. People got to start connecting your name to community. And so then that's your way to show I can be competitive in the polls. The other part about this is your presentation. If you know that you are not a great public speaker, but you're running for political office, you and your campaign team have to be able to work around that, which means all of my internet and social media stuff cannot be live. It needs to be recorded and rehearsed. When I go to a debate, I need to try to think about what can my opponent potentially say about me before they say it. I'm solving and answering questions before they get to me. Preparation is the best answer. And that's how you can start to show early competitiveness in the polls. You have to present a clear electoral coalition. And so when we start getting into glass window politics, retail politics, I'm going to present myself in these different places to get people to turn out to vote for me. Who is your candidates? Who are the people that will vote for you? I'm sorry. Who is your base? How can you articulate this is how I will win? Who are the people that you know? These are the groups that are going to vote for me. If I know that I'm an educator, I better have the educators on my side.
Mhm.
If I know that I am a pastor running for office, the churches better be on my side. If I am a former athlete dwelling into politics, I gotta sell what I did for the city. Y'all remember when I intercepted that ball in the Super Bowl? Well, I'm Tracy Porter and I'm running for alderman in West Baton Rouge. You have to connect to that and show people, number one, this is my current base before I start trying to expand the base. Going back to Jasmine Crockett, that was one of the questions that people asked of her. Did she know her Texas base fully before trying to expand it? Because that goes back to that issue of where do I spend time? Where do I spend money? Where do I send my resources? Because candidates can lose races by sending their resources to the wrong places.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
might think, you know what, my base is strong. I'm just going to focus on my base. I'm not going to go anywhere else. Meanwhile, their opponent is over in that other side of town, and that entire town is now side of town is now galvanized behind them. And
Mhm.
now you lose the election because you thought your base was strong enough, but your base was only going to turn out at a 23% rate anyway. They
Mm.
have to control the narrative.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I think about creating campaign plans for candidates, I basically run it like a CIA investigation. So when I was first running for when I was first graduating and I was trying to get a job after my master's degree, I filled out an application with the CIA. I'm not proud of it, but I did. But I was looking for a job. But when I did that application, and a lot of people may not know this, the CIA requires you to list every home you ever stayed at. You have to list any family members who have been incarcerated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Me, I'm a kid that went to 8 schools before high school. I moved homes a lot. Most of my family has been incarcerated, so I'm like, I'm not gonna get this job. But the reason I bring that up is when I am running for office and somebody is doing research on me to put out to say this is why Eugene is not a viable candidate, I need to have answers for those things. Some of those things won't even be bad, they might just be embarrassing. But how can I turn embarrassing into charming? Or how can I make embarrassing sound good? How can I make embarrassing funny? Right? How can I make it a part of my personality? And so you have to control the narrative on how you frame issues, but also how people frame you. If you present yourself as the family man, people can't find out that you had an affair and cheated on your wife 20 years ago. It doesn't matter if it was 20 years ago. People are still going to say, well, once a cheater, always a cheater. And so you have to be able to control the narrative on these things. And that means often getting ahead of what your opponents can do. So you have to do the research on yourself before you actually present yourself to be a candidate. But you also have to control the narrative on your issues. One of the things that a lot of black people had an issue with for Barack Obama when he ran for president the first time is he ran a deracialized campaign. He didn't really speak about race or racial issues in the turn of speaking directly to black people. When he spoke about welfare, which many would consider a black issue, he spoke about welfare as an American issue because it is an American issue, right? But a lot of black people were angry that he presented those issues in this way. Why he not talking to us? Right? But he was framing the narrative because Barack Obama knew, and his campaign team knew, the Democratic Party knew, if Barack Obama frames this conversation in this election around, I'm the black man that's trying to be a president for black people, he does not win.
Right.
So even when you're discussing the issues, You have to discuss the issues in a certain way. You also got to distress. I'm sorry, excuse me. And I got two more. Address the electability concerns directly. What that means is there's going to be skepticism about you. You run into those things head on. So that's your past electoral success. That's broad support. That's changing demographics. If you have to think about your race, your gender, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One thing that using Kamala Harris as an example, and this is a good example of trying to address concerns, but also having people question if it's the right concerns to be addressed. If you go back to the Democratic National Convention when Kamala Harris is accepting the nomination to be the Democratic nominee for president of the United States, Kamala Harris shows up in a navy blue suit with a nice silk navy blue shirt with a bow. And she looked amazing, right? But for some people, that was an issue. Why was it an issue? Because historically, when women have been moving into political leadership, if you go back to the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton came on stage wearing all white.
Mhm.
Why did Hillary Clinton come on stage wearing all white? Why have women historically worn that all white? Because white was the color of the women's suffrage movement. So Kamala Harris is addressing the issue of her being a woman. And some people are saying, should you be addressing the issue of the men and the people who are disrespecting you because you're a woman? Or should you be addressing the issues of women who are already your base? Especially when you think about the idea that when she first gets when she first gets the go ahead from Joe Biden in the summer, when would black women show up in the first night and they raise over $1 million and have thousands of women on a Zoom call? And so that might be something. It might seem like something small, but it's something that leads into the actual election because now Kamala Harris is trying to measure, and this is an issue that black women in politics face on certain levels because of the stereotypes about strong black women. It can work in their advantage. But then on some levels, because of the stereotypes about women in general and strong black women, it could be a disadvantage because it then says, I know that these women won't listen, or I know these women can't handle this situation. And so Kamala Harris kind of strayed the line her entire election of I'm addressing women, I'm addressing everybody else. I'm addressing women, I'm addressing everybody else. And that could have been a mistake. So you have to address those electability concerns directly. But for you and your team, y'all got to understand what are the concerns and which are the larger concerns that I should address. And then lastly, you got to build visible enthusiasm. And I think
Mm.
that's just any candidate, right? Are people happy about you? I wasn't old enough to vote for Barack Obama the first time. I was a senior in high school. I was only 17. I couldn't vote. But I remember the excitement of black teenagers during that time. Like, we're not old enough to vote, but we're like, we're about to have a black president. And then one of the things about Barack Obama was that he was the first president to utilize social media in a specific way, right? Because we're at the
Mhm.
advent of social media at that time. And so he was on the forefront of that. But you have Barack Obama mixing social media with black culture, with hip hop, and all these things. And we're like, yes, man, we're about to have a black president.
Yeah.
We were enthused about that. And so for him, it was kind of easy. It was, I don't want to say a layup, but it was easy for us as teenagers to get behind him because he basically was able to catch on to everything that we know and love.
Mm.
For a candidate who doesn't have that ability, who doesn't have the opportunity to do that, let me say, you got to be able to have large rallies, strong grassroots organizing, active volunteer networks. You got to be able to signal that you can build momentum and help counter narratives that you cannot win. When you send out your mailers and say, I'm hosting a fundraiser on December 4th at 7:06 p.m., people need to know that they're going to show up. Because if you host that fundraiser in person and nobody shows up, When the media gets there and they take pictures and they report on that, they're going to say only 45 people showed up to Brother Eddie Francis fundraising dinner.
Yeah.
And now the narrative is, well, why didn't do people not like him? Why didn't people show up? Is he not a viable candidate? But if you have 200 people show up in a building that's only situated for 180 people, oh, it was standing room only, y'all. It was the
Yeah.
hottest ticket of the night. Eddie Francis is the candidate that you want to get behind. Even if you said nothing of worth that night, it's kind of fake it till you make it. People saw the pictures, and now they're like, I need to be with that candidate. It's kind of I'm gonna use this analogy and then I'm done. But it's kind of like club culture. The club knows they're not full, but they're gonna keep a line outside for a little bit for people to think like, man, I've been out here for 20 minutes, bro. When I'm gonna get in the club, because they're building anticipation, but they're also making people like, when I get in here, it's gonna be crazy. It's the same thing with politics. You have to build that anticipation, even if it doesn't actually exist yet. And so, what a lot of candidates have tried to do is they've tried to use social media to do that. Unfortunately, that is the wrong strategy. Social media can help, but traditional politics are still the number one way to go. You still need to campaign door to door. You still need to call people. You still need to visit churches. You still need to visit schools. You need to still send out mailers. Yes, they can see your Instagram profile. But when you think about, and I'll use Louisiana as an example, the voting age, the ages of our highest turnout voters, we're thinking about elderly voters and middle-aged voters. So when you're thinking about those people, how many of those people are pulling their phone out to scroll your Instagram page? They're not. But they may have seen your mailer in their mailbox when they check the mail. They may have seen you at their HOA meeting when you came to discuss you wanting to fix the potholes and the street lamps. They may have seen you at their church when you were shaking hands after service, or sometimes your pastor, if you are an actual member, might actually allow you to get up and say something. And so you have to build that enthusiasm even if it doesn't exist. And I think those are ways that candidates can do it. You got to demonstrate visibility. You got to present a clear coalition. You got to control the narrative. You got to address electability concerns. And you also have to build visible enthusiasm. But ultimately, we also need voters to be able to separate themselves from their perceptions.
Mm,
We
mm.
have to get away from the stereotypes that we've created.
Yeah. And I mean, it's something I talk about all the time because at the end of the day, leadership is still about people and it's still about trust and you got to get people to trust you. And so that's what it sounds like. Excuse
Very
me.
much so.
Yeah, so that's what it sounds like we're talking about. Dr. Eugene Lee-Johnson, assistant professor of political science from Southern University. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed it as always.
Thank you for having me, Brother Francis.